You are ankle-deep in warm water, holding a bundle that may be the last one the ship accepts. Kilwa's wealth depends on a wind that changes twice a year, which gives this load the expensive manners of a calendar. Miss the turn, and it may wait 5 months. If this history honestly helps you settle, you may like or subscribe. Tell me where you are listening and your local time. Let the room grow dim, get comfortable, and stay with this 14th century loader as the tide pulls away. The knot takes spray, and one awkward bundle still has 100 yards of water to cross. The bundle has been tied twice and trusted once. You hold it against your ribs while a narrow boat rocks beyond the line where the water reaches your knees. The ship is farther out, anchored beyond the reef shallows, dark against the afternoon glare. Between you and its side lie perhaps 100 yards of water. 2 men who disagree about the tally, and a tide that has begun going the wrong way. You know the private count better than either tally. 1 full day remained when you woke. Now the sun has already passed its highest point. The expected turn in the seasonal wind is not a bell that rings on command, but everyone has watched the signs and made the same calculation. If the captain decides the hold is complete before this bundle arrives, the knot in your arms will become somebody's problem on land. Since somebody is likely to be you, you step forward. Your first stride sinks deeper than the last. Wet sand grips the heel, releases it grudgingly, then asks for the same effort again. The bundle contains cloth-wrapped merchandise rather than anything fragile enough to justify ceremony. Yet it has acquired the personality of a sleeping person who objects to being moved. You lift it higher. Ahead, the boatman braces 1 foot against a rib of the small craft and extends both hands. He cannot bring the boat closer without grounding it, and you cannot reach him without letting the lower corner touch the water. Neither option improves the cargo. Behind you, a second basket waits above the wash line. Beyond it stand the store walls, the houses, and the low town built across the island. You do not turn to admire any of them. A town can be magnificent after the load is aboard. At present it is mostly where the remaining work is kept. The parcel's rope leaves a red line across your skin. You shift your grip without setting it down, because the water is rising around the cloth. You pass the bundle forward on a count of 3. The boat dips. The boatman swears under his breath, and the parcel lands across 2 thoughts instead of along the center line. That is enough to make the craft list. You keep both hands on it while he shifts a basket of voyage food to the other side. A small boat carrying goods through shallow water has no interest in status. It obeys weight, balance, and the depth beneath its hull. Kilwa's ocean trade therefore ends and begins with this unglamorous arithmetic. Large sailing vessels can wait in safer water, but every basket, jar, bundle, and person must still cross the last reach by smaller craft or on a shoulder. The broad trade between Africa, Arabia, the Gulf, and India narrows here to the width of a plank. You feel the boat steady. Only then do you let go. The tally keeper on the beach calls out a number. The man in the boat calls back another. You know both are wrong, though one of them is wrong in a way that favors finishing early. The marks refer to loads, but a load has not remained a dependable unit. 1 basket was divided after its handle split. 2 bundles were tied together for the walk and separated for the boat. A jar counted at the store has been held back because its stopper leaks. Professional record keeping has met a beach and is losing on points. You wade back toward shore, repeating your own sequence under your breath. Not the total cargo, only today's final pieces. 7 baskets, 5 bundles, 1 long awkward item, and the provisions already sent. You touch a finger to your thumb for each group. The count is private because saying it aloud would invite 2 more opinions. You rebuild the sequence from memory, matching each object to the person who carried it. The missing 6th item still refuses to become visible. You reach the beach as the water withdraws around your ankles. The second basket is woven tight, broad at the mouth and heavier on one side. It may hold dried provisions for the voyage, but the exact contents matter less than the way the weight pulls. You crouch, slide your forearms under it, and stand without haste. The town behind you is a Swahili town, African in its language, families, politics, and long local history. Its people have built a Muslim, ocean-facing urban life while trading with visitors from many shores. Older writers once tried to explain such towns as foreign creations. Archaeology has left that notion behind. You need not carry the argument farther than that. You carry the basket. The people around you are not scenery for outsiders. They are residents arranging their own work, houses, worship, credit, meals, and disputes around a sea route they understand extremely well. The statement does not require a lecture on identity. It changes where you place the camera, keeping local residents at the center of every decision. The basket rises to your hip, then no farther. You decide that dignity is lighter than grain, and hook both hands beneath the rim. The boat has returned half empty, its first load transferred to the anchored vessel. A rope trails from its bow. The boatman jumps into shin-deep water and pulls until the keel nudges sand, but the falling tide has lengthened the walk. This is the first practical lesson of the afternoon. The wind sets the season, yet the tide sets the next 10 minutes. No captain can order either one to become convenient. You and the boatman lift together, turn the basket sideways, and discover that its broad mouth will not pass cleanly between the gunwale and a fixed thwart. It has crossed half an ocean's trading system, only to be defeated by 4 inches of boat. You lower it again and begin removing the top layer into a smaller container. The smaller container is tied with a strip of cloth from the basket's cover. Nothing is wasted merely because the clock has become inconvenient. You do not empty enough to change the tally, only enough to change the shape. A folded cloth covers the provisions while the boatman holds the smaller basket steady. Sand sticks to your wet forearms. The work is ordinary, and that ordinariness is the point. Kilwa's wealth does not arrive as a single golden event. It accumulates through repeated acts of timing and handling. Goods from the southern route, including ivory and gold moving through Sofala, meet ships and merchants linked to Arabia, the Persian Gulf and India. Imported cloth, beads and ceramics come the other way. No surviving record gives a trustworthy total for all the gold that passed through Kilwa. The evidence supports connection and importance, not an invented mountain of precise tonnage. You cover the divided load, retie the cloth, and test the knot with both hands before allowing the boat to take it. You remember the store's shaded interior and the hands that packed each piece. Ocean commerce is already a chain of local labor before a sail fills. The boat pushes off with the basket balanced near its middle. You walk beside it until the water reaches your thighs, then release the bow rope. The boatman rows first, using short strokes in the shallows. Farther out, another man can raise a small scrap of sail if the angle permits, but for now the oars are more certain. You remain standing in the water, watching the hull settle. The afternoon wind wrinkles the surface without yet declaring itself the season's new master. Over the western Indian Ocean, the dominant winds reverse during the year. The northeast season carries vessels southward along the coast. Months later, the southwest flow helps take them north and away. The pattern varies by place and year, especially this far south, yet it is regular enough to build livelihoods around. It is not regular enough to forgive a captain who assumes tomorrow will behave exactly as expected. You return to the dry edge and find that the two tally keepers have improved their disagreement by making it louder. One points toward the store, the other points toward the ship. You point at neither. Instead, you draw a line in damp sand and set pebbles along it, one for each item still ashore. The method is not an excavated custom, and no chronicle records your pebbles. It is simply a plausible solution for an adult who needs 3 minds to share 1 count. 5 pebbles remain after the boat's latest load. 1 represents the long piece that cannot sit across the narrow craft. 2 are small bundles, 2 are baskets. The man from the store insists there should be 6. You ask him to name the missing thing. He answers with a category. You ask for an object. The distinction creates a thoughtful silence, which is the closest the afternoon has come to administrative peace. The storeman finally names the leaking jar. You point to it beside his foot, where it has been quietly failing to embark. You leave the pebble argument where it lies and walk toward the store. Its doorway is shaded, the interior cooler than the beach. Goods wait there because waiting is part of the trade, not an accident outside it. A coastal merchant must think in two calendars at once. One is the short calendar of tide, light, meals, hands, and boat trips. The other is the wind calendar, measured in seasons. A vessel arriving with the northeast wind may remain while cargo is exchanged, repairs are made, and agreements settle into shape. It must be ready when the favourable return develops. A missed tide costs hours. A missed monsoon can cost months. You touch the remaining long item and judge its balance. It is a length of ivory, known in the trade but awkward in any small craft. Gold can hide in a pouch. Ivory announces itself by extending beyond whatever space has been assigned to it. The long item has waited against the wall all morning because everyone knew it would be troublesome and therefore hoped another person would solve it. You and another loader carry the ivory toward the water, one at each end. It is not enormous, but it is long enough to make turning a shared decision. The path between the store and beach has been crossed all day. Sand has been churned, packed, soaked, and loosened again. Each footstep chooses a different surface. You count the pace rather than the days for a moment. 12 steps to the darker sand, 9 more to the first wash. Then the front bearer slips half a foot and recovers. Nobody falls, nobody cheers. The tusk merely swings, reminding both of you that a valuable object remains subject to leverage. At the boat, you lay it parallel to the keel. The end still projects. The boatman studies it, moves an oar, studies it again, and gives the slow nod of a man accepting a bad arrangement because the alternatives have become worse. The ivory goes alone except for one compact bundle wedged beside it. You hold the boat while the other loader climbs out. A wave no higher than your calf arrives at precisely the angle needed to turn the bow. You pull, the boatman pushes with an oar, and the long cargo shifts 2 fingers' breadth. That is enough to stop everyone. Rope goes around it, then around a thwart, then back on itself. You test the knot. The boatman tests your test. On the anchored vessel, men are already moving along the rail. The captain may be checking trim, counting water jars, or simply making his impatience visible. From shore you cannot know. You can know that there are now 4 pebbles in the sand and fewer trips before dark. The private count of days has compressed into a count of crossings. You push the boat until it floats free. A second rope is added near the projecting end. Its purpose is less to hold weight than to prevent one bad roll from controlling the boat. As the boat rows out, you look past it toward the larger vessel. The word dhow is often used loosely today for many Western Indian Ocean sailing craft. Medieval ships varied, and the evidence for their exact forms is incomplete. What survives at Kilwa includes carved ship images, anchors, imported goods, and the town itself, all of which show a deeply maritime life without handing us a neat shipbuilder's plan. You do not need that plan to understand the immediate problem. The vessel offshore has a hull, a hold, rigging, a captain, and a limit. It can use a favourable seasonal wind with skill. It cannot make a useful long return passage by simply arguing against the monsoon. You watch the little boat reach its side, a rope descends, the ivory rises slowly, turning above the water, while every person below it becomes unusually attentive. The tusk clears the rail. Only then do you breathe out and turn back to the beach. 1 pebble may be removed. 3 remain, unless the store tally keeper has discovered a 7th interpretation. He has not. He has discovered the leaking jar, which he now believes should count because it was counted earlier. You remind him that it is not sailing. He replies that the record does not say whether it sailed, only whether it belonged to the load. This is an excellent point for tomorrow and a useless one for today. You set the jar beside him and ask whether he would like to carry it aboard while holding the stopper down. The suggestion restores the distinction between a cargo list and a departing cargo. He scratches a correction into his tablet or tally surface. You remove no pebble for the jar. The 3 remaining objects are real, dry enough, and capable of leaving. The corrected account now distinguishes what was planned, what was packed, and what actually left the beach. Only the last category can catch the wind. The next 2 bundles are small enough to carry together, and badly shaped enough to make that confidence regrettable. You sling one against each side. The ropes bite at different heights, so every step corrects the last. On the beach, children and older residents move around the work without treating it as a spectacle. Kilwa is not only a port operation, it is a lived town of houses, mosques, cooking, craft, exchange, and family business. Some buildings are earth and timber, others use coral and lime. Imported bowls may sit inside local rooms, while local pottery carries ordinary food. Small copper coins struck in Kilwa pass through domestic spaces as well as commercial ones. The ocean enters the household in fragments, not as a permanent parade. You reach the water and lower both bundles beside the boat. One stays upright. The other rolls toward the gunwale with the conviction of an object seeking freedom. Imported objects do not make the people handling them foreign. They show how local households and markets selected things from long routes and gave them uses. You catch the rolling bundle with your knee. The boatman catches it with both hands. Between you, the parcel is persuaded that departure does not require escape. He wedges it beneath a crosspiece and adds rope. The other bundle fits neatly, which earns it immediate suspicion. You check its knot, press the wrapping, and find no dampness. The boat now carries the 2 last compact pieces. One basket will remain on shore. Light has begun to flatten across the water, but there is time for at least one more crossing if loading at the ship is quick. That condition belongs to other people. Your own part is to send the boat. You push until the keel lifts. The rowers pull away. The beach quiets around the single waiting basket, and suddenly the day's whole question has the shape of one object with 2 handles. One rower spits into the water, resets his hands, and turns the bow. The 2 bundles remain exactly where rope and caution put them. You stand beside the basket and count again. Not the cargo, the days. During the arriving season, ships came down the coast with winds from the northeast. Their people entered town, found hosts, exchanged goods, obtained food and water, and waited through negotiations that could not be hurried past weather. Now the return season is near. You have marked the remaining time privately because a spoken prediction can become a public promise. 11 days became 7, then 3, then 1. The signs have not all agreed. The air has shifted in small ways. Clouds have arranged themselves differently. Experienced sailors have compared notes without producing certainty. This vessel's captain has chosen readiness over perfect knowledge. If the useful wind strengthens tomorrow, he wants open water. If it waits, he can remain anchored. If it comes and he is still taking baskets, the sea will not pause out of professional courtesy. The final basket belongs to the owner of the cloth bundles, and that fact makes it heavier before you touch it. It contains voyage provisions and a few small trade items that were added late. The owner has spent the afternoon asking whether it has gone. Each time, you have answered truthfully in the least satisfying way. Not yet. Now you crouch and test the handles. One creaks. The basket can cross, but perhaps not by its own handles. You fetch a carrying cloth, slide it beneath the base, and bring the ends up over your shoulders. The load settles against your back. This turns a basket into something closer to a stubborn second torso. You straighten slowly. The tide has withdrawn farther, exposing rippled sand and patches where your feet sink at once. The boat is still at the ship. You wait, bearing the weight because putting it down would mean lifting it again. The carrying cloth spreads the pressure across your back. It does not reduce the weight, but it makes the weight less determined to injure one point. Waiting under a load makes time visible. You feel it in the pressure across your shoulders and in the darkening strip beneath the ship's hull. The basket's owner comes to ask whether one more package might fit inside it. You look at him. He looks at the basket. The proposed package is the size of a folded mat and has apparently existed all day without attracting urgency. You tell him the basket is tied, balanced, and already on a human being. He says the package is light. This is how cargo multiplies at the edge of departure. You decline, not grandly, but by beginning to walk toward the returning boat. Behind you, the owner must decide whether his new package deserves 5 months of storage. Its sudden importance diminishes with every step you take. The owner follows for several paces, still describing the package's lightness. His words grow fainter while the basket's actual weight remains unchanged. The boat grounds sooner than before because the water has gone out. The rower jumps down and pulls. You meet him beyond the first sand ridge. Together you angle the basket off your back and into the hull. The worn handle gives a sharp complaint but does not break. You leave the carrying cloth under it as a sling. The boatman asks whether this is truly the last. You say it is the last basket. He hears the qualification and looks toward shore. The owner of the folded package is still standing there. Both of you look away before he can convert eye contact into consent. The rower shifts the basket, checks the freeboard, and says there is room for one person. You climb in. After a day of sending loads outward, you will accompany this one and settle the count at the ship. You sit low near the bow while the boat backs away. The shallows are now too thin for a straight course. The rower follows a darker channel between exposed patches. Coral and sand lie beneath the surface, close enough to read but not close enough to touch. Kilwa Kisiwani sits in a sheltered bay, yet shelter does not erase reefs, shoals, or changing water. Local knowledge turns them into roots. The boatman knows where the hull can pass at this state of tide. His strokes are calm, but no stroke is casual. Behind you, the beach grows flatter. Ahead, the sailing vessel rises higher with every yard. Its side is not a quay. The final basket must be lifted from a moving small boat up a moving hull. The last 100 yards have become the last 10 feet, which may be the more troublesome distance. From this low seat, the anchored ship seems less like a distant emblem and more like a wall with ropes, hands, and an opening above. A line drops from the ship. You loop it through the carrying cloth beneath the basket and make the knot where the boatman directs. Another line steadies the upper rim. Men above pull. The basket rises, tilts, and sheds a thin stream of sand from its base. For one moment it hangs between craft, neither ashore nor aboard. You keep one hand beneath it until your reach ends. The load clears the rail. Someone shouts that it is received. The boatman looks at you, waiting for relief. Instead, you ask whether they counted it. He laughs once, because the day's final cargo has reached the ship, only to become a number again. A voice above calls the total. It matches your private sequence. On shore, at least one tally keeper will consider this a personal defeat. Men above call timing to one another. Their voices coordinate pull and pause, turning a suspended basket into a controlled ascent rather than a gamble. You climb the rope ladder or sidestep slowly, keeping your weight close to the hull. On deck, the captain's representative stands with the cargo account. The captain himself is occupied aft. The representative names the total again. You name the categories. He checks the ivory, the bundles, the baskets, and the provisions. One divided basket has confused his record exactly as it confused the beach. You explain the split and point to the 2 containers now stowed together. He counts them as one load, then as 2 pieces, then decides the distinction no longer deserves the remaining light. The record is corrected. This is the moment Kilwa's wealth becomes visible in its least dramatic form. The right goods, in the right hull, entered under the right count before the useful wind. Nothing glitters. A tired man makes a mark. You walk toward the hold opening and look down as the last basket is lowered into place. Around it are objects gathered through many journeys and agreements. Ivory from roots reaching south through Sofala is unmistakable. Gold may travel in far smaller quantities and containers, valuable precisely because a little can represent much. Imported cloth and ceramics have arrived on other voyages and moved into town. No one standing here possesses the total history of the cargo network. Each person knows a section, a supplier, a debt, a path, a host, a measure, a season. Kilwa's position gave its rulers and merchants influence over trade moving between the southern gold routes and the wider ocean. Its prosperity was built from that position. Local political power, urban institutions, and repeated successful timing. The wind enabled the system. People made the timetable profitable. The gold route does not end at one ruler's store. It runs through negotiations, transport, tribute, purchase, and risk that no single source fully records. The officer closes the account for the day. That does not mean the ship is ready. Water jars must be checked. Rope must be inspected. Food must be placed where it can be reached. The hold must be trimmed so weight does not make the vessel handle badly. You help shift the final basket half a pace, because its first position presses against a jar. The captain is not refusing cargo now. He is refusing further delay. A late package may still come alongside, but it will need a strong reason and a captain in a generous mood. Neither is abundant at sunset. You lean against the rail and see the man with the folded mat package on the beach. It remains under his arm. He has learned, in a single afternoon, that the last item is often last because everyone else has finished being patient. A crewman wedges soft material beside the jar to stop it knocking. Readiness includes these small preventions, because a voyage magnifies careless placement. Now the title question has its answer in the ache across your shoulders. Kilwa grew rich on a wind that changed, because the reversing monsoon turned distance into a schedule. Ships could come south on one seasonal flow and leave northward on the next. The town stood where cargo from Sofala and the East African interior could meet merchants and goods from across the western Indian Ocean. But the wind did not create wealth by blowing at random. Residents made stores, credit, boats, houses, meals, markets, religious and political institutions, and relationships that carried people through the waiting. They counted backward from the turn. Miss it, and a cargo might sit for about 5 months until the useful season returned. You would still need food, space, guards, and plain patience every day. Wealth here was knowing how many days remained and being loaded before the count reached none. That answer also explains why visitors become residents for a season. A port that can house waiting people captures value between the two useful winds. The ship remains anchored tonight. That may seem to soften the urgency, but it does not. Leaving an anchorage is not the same as starting from an empty beach. The crew wants the hold closed, the small boats dismissed, and the deck clear before the new wind builds. A vessel can wait ready. It cannot become ready at the same speed as weather changes. You descend to the small boat with the accepted tally in your head. The captain's representative has given no written triumph, only a nod that means the day's cargo is complete. The rower asks whether he should return for the folded package. You tell him the captain has closed loading. He does not ask whether the package is light. He has been present for that kind of lightness before. Below deck, the accepted goods no longer need the light. On deck, every loose rope and open container still does. The rowback is slower against the remaining chop. You sit facing the ship and watch its hull lower as distance grows. The air no longer feels like a wall of heat. A slight coolness moves over your wet clothing. It may be the beginning of the seasonal change, or an ordinary evening breath along the coast. You refuse to promote it into a prophecy. Sailors with more experience will watch through the night. On the beach, people will notice cloud, smell, direction, and the behavior of the water. Modern descriptions can chart broad monsoon patterns. Your working world still contains uncertainty at the scale of tomorrow. A timetable set by wind is reliable enough to organize commerce and uncertain enough to keep everyone humble. You trail your fingers beside the boat, then lift them when the water shallows. The hull touches sand. You climb out and take the bow rope. The last walk through the shallows is made without a burden, which feels briefly like an error. Your shoulders expect weight and receive only the pull of the boat. On shore, the store tally keeper waits. You give him the final count. He checks his mark, asks about the split basket, asks about the ivory, and finally asks whether the leaking jar was entered. You tell him the jar is beside his foot. He looks down as though it has betrayed him personally. The two accounts now agree on what sailed, and disagree only on what almost sailed. That category can occupy tomorrow. You remove the last 3 pebbles from the sand and put them in your palm. Not because pebbles are official, but because leaving them arranged would invite the argument to begin again before breakfast. The empty walk reveals how tired your legs have become. Work often announces its cost only after the object is no longer being held. The cargo owner approaches with a question shaped like praise. Did everything go? You answer that everything accepted is aboard. He notices the wording, then sees his folded package still under another man's arm. The package will remain. Perhaps it can go on a coastal boat later. Perhaps it returns to a store. Perhaps its owner spends the next season insisting that it was the one item that mattered. None of that changes your result. The basket is on the ship. The tally matches. The ivory is tied below. You have made the final trip within the remaining light. Your pride is small, private, and practical. It is also accompanied by a grievance. Tomorrow, somebody will describe the loading as if the cargo simply went aboard. You know exactly how many shoulders that sentence has omitted. You wash sand from your forearms at the edge of the water. The tide continues outward, exposing more of the route you crossed when it was hidden. On the ship, a lamp appears near the stern. The sail is still furled. No departure has happened, and no promise has been made beyond readiness. You count once more, though the count is no longer yours to solve. 0 baskets on the beach. 0 accepted bundles in the store. 1 jar left because it leaks. 1 folded package left because it was discovered too late. 1 night before the captain hopes to move, the private day count that governed your week has ended in a row of ordinary facts. You turn from the anchored vessel without waiting for a panorama. Your work closes on the sore place beneath the carrying cloth and the knowledge that the final basket did, in fact, get there. Your grievance will not enter a chronicle. It remains accurate nonetheless, preserved in the tenderness across your shoulders when you lift an arm. Behind the beach, supper smoke rises among the houses. The people from the ship who have lived in Kilwa through the season will not all sleep aboard tonight. Some have hosts, agreements, and unfinished conversations in town. A reversing wind creates more than departures. It creates residence between departures. Months in which a visitor must eat under someone's roof and learn the weight of another household's routines. You carry the leaking jar away from the tally keeper before he can count it a 3rd time. Its stopper remains pressed beneath your thumb. The path leads inland from the water, past walls made from the coast itself, toward a courtyard where a guest has been expected to leave for so long that expectation has become part of the furniture. The jar leaves a damp trail on the path. You keep it upright, giving one failed item the careful transport denied to the successful cargo. You enter the courtyard carrying the jar, and the beach argument contracts to a damp ring beneath your hand. A lamp has been set near the wall. A visiting merchant sits where moving air can reach him, sorting a small pile of cloth and trying not to occupy more room than he already does. He arrived with the northeast season. The household has heard several versions of when he will leave, each one delivered with increasing caution. Tonight he asks whether the ship is ready. You say the last basket is aboard. The householder hears this from the cooking place and does not celebrate. Ready is not gone, and gone is the only condition that frees the sleeping space. She lifts the lid from the pot, judges the amount, and adds a little water. The wind has arranged another evening at her table. Trade will continue here because the guest still needs supper before he can become a departing merchant. You set the jar beside the wall and leave the household to its evening. Your small pride remains with the basket aboard, along with the private grievance that tomorrow someone will say the cargo went out, as though shoulders had nothing to do with it. You are the householder who added water to the pot, and the guest notices. He says there is no need to make more. This is polite and inaccurate. He has eaten in the courtyard for nearly 4 months, long enough to know which bowl is his, and not long enough to know that declining supper requires doing so before the lid comes off. You set the leaking jar aside, wash your hands, and measure the remaining grain. The visitor came with the northeast wind, carrying cloth and connections to people across the ocean. He cannot leave until a favorable return season and a ready ship coincide. In the meantime, he needs food, a sleeping place, introductions, translation, trust, and somewhere to keep goods dry. The monsoon has not merely delivered a merchant to Kilwa. It has assigned him to a household, and the household has been adjusting its evening ever since. The house has no separate season for commerce and family life. The visitor's appetite arrives at the same fire as everyone else's. You divide the food without turning hospitality into a performance. Fish from coastal waters and grain brought into the town belong to ordinary subsistence, though the exact meal in this carefully composite house is imagined. Archaeology shows food preparation inside Swahili houses, local cooking vessels, fish remains, crop processing, and imported tablewares entering domestic life. The evidence gives you a working courtyard, not this particular pot. You return at once to the person holding the spoon. The guest receives a portion. A child moves closer to the wall to make room. Another adult places a low bowl between them. Nobody discusses the cost of the extra mouth. They have discussed it on earlier evenings, and the subject now lives in the size of each serving. 4 months is long enough for generosity to acquire arithmetic. The serving bowl is local, the guest's spoon his own. Objects from different routes meet without turning supper into a catalogue. The guest speaks some Swahili, a Bantu language formed on this African coast, and you understand parts of his Arabic. Neither of you speaks the other's language as elegantly as either believes. Trade proceeds anyway. Numbers can be repeated. Cloth can be unfolded. A coin can be placed beside a measure. Names of ports, kin, and partners travel more easily than jokes. When a sentence fails, you point to an object and begin again. This slow work is not a picturesque extra attached to commerce. It is commerce. A bargain depends on shared meaning, and shared meaning may take 3 attempts across a courtyard while supper cools. The guest has learned that your pause does not always mean agreement. You have learned that his elaborate courtesy may be the road toward a lower price. Both discoveries have saved money. You repeat the price in both languages and show the length with your hands. Agreement improves when speech and measurement support each other. After the meal, you clear one side of the courtyard. Swahili stone houses often organized movement through stepped or connected courts, with outer spaces able to receive people while more private rooms lay farther in. Excavations at nearby Songo Manara show how domestic and economic activity mixed inside houses. Food preparation, cotton work, coins, imported ceramics, and spaces suited to receiving visitors. The arrangement differs from house to house, and not every resident lived in coral stone. In your composite household, the courtyard is where the guest can open cloth without carrying it into the innermost room. You spread a mat. He brings a wrapped length from the storage corner. The day's cargo may have closed at the beach, but another exchange begins under a lamp, with a householder, a visitor, and 2 neighbors who have come to inspect the weave. The outer court lets business reach the house without granting every visitor access to its deepest rooms. Space itself helps manage trust. You watch the first neighbor rub the cloth between finger and thumb. Imported cloth was one of the valued goods crossing the ocean, while cotton thread and cloth production also belonged to local economic life. The category is broad, and the surviving record does not tell you the origin of every bolt in every room. The guest names the place from which he obtained this piece. You know the name, though not the maker. The neighbor asks for a smaller length. The guest prefers to sell more. You pour water for everyone, and let the disagreement use its own time. A K would not improve it. The important facts are here. The goods are visible. The people who might extend credit are present, and the host can judge whether either side is stretching the truth. The courtyard has become a marketplace without ceasing to be where the household ate supper. One neighbor holds the cloth toward the lamp. The second checks the cut edge, looking for a flaw hidden by the fold. A small copper coin appears on the mat. It is thin, struck rather than cast, and modest enough to disappear beneath a fold. Kilwa's rulers issued copper coins from around the end of the first millennium into later centuries, and excavations in the Kilwa region have found them in quantity. Thousands have come from Kilwa contexts, while a hoard of more than 300 was excavated in one room at Songo Manara. Their use was not limited to royal display. Finds in houses suggest daily exchange, and some coins were pierced or used in other ways. You turn this coin with one finger. Its inscription belongs to authority and belief, but its immediate work is to settle a fraction of a cloth purchase. The ocean trade may move ivory and gold. The courtyard still needs change. Several coins bear rulers' names, yet their archaeological contexts show lives beyond royal ceremony. Small money travels where ordinary obligations are settled. The neighbor offers 2 coins and a promise. The guest prefers 3 coins and no promise. You know the neighbor's family and the guest's departure date, which gives you the inconvenient advantage of understanding both risks. If the wind takes the visitor soon, a debt due next month is not very helpful. If the wind delays him, he will remain close enough to ask. You suggest 2 coins now, and the balance in grain before departure. The guest calculates. The neighbor looks offended by a proposal suspiciously close to what she expected. This is one reason a host matters. A visitor does not arrive in an empty economy. He enters relationships already thick with memory. Your recommendation turns foreign goods into a local obligation. It also turns your courtyard into the place where the obligation will return, which nobody mentions. Your proposal protects the guest from a distant debt and the neighbor from losing the cloth. It also gives you the work of remembering. One account of 14th century Mogadishu, written by the traveller Ibn Battuta, describes merchants being met by hosts who helped sell and buy for them. That is evidence for another Swahili city and one visitor's report. Not a rule book proving the same procedure in every Kilwa house, yet it helps explain a wider pattern also visible archaeologically. Visiting traders depended on local relationships, and houses could be social and commercial centers. You do not quote the traveller to your guest. You ask whether he accepts the grain arrangement. He does, after reducing the promised amount by a measure. The neighbor raises it again. They settle between the 2 figures. The cloth is cut. A transaction that began across the ocean ends with a household deciding how much food must arrive before a ship leaves. The comparison with Mogadishu is useful because it shows a coastal logic of hosting, while the differences between towns must remain open. The neighbor goes, carrying the folded cloth. The second visitor remains because he has come less to buy than to listen. News moves with ships, and so do rumors that dress themselves as news. A vessel farther north may have delayed. A ruler may have changed an obligation. A partner in another town may have prospered or failed. You let the guest speak, but you notice where he shifts from what he saw to what another man told him. The distinction matters when credit follows the story. The Kilwa Chronicle, written down in later forms, also carries dynastic traditions, including claims of Shirazi descent. Those traditions are important as traditions of prestige and identity, not as a dated passenger list of Persian founders. You set that scholarly caution aside and return to the lamp. The guest has just named a debtor you know personally. The listening neighbor asks one precise question about the jars. Precision improves the story by making it smaller. You ask how he knows the debtor's position. He names a cousin, then a ship, then a port. The chain contains enough links to bend. You do not accuse him of lying. Ocean trade relies on information that is often true, sometimes late, and occasionally improved by the teller. Instead, you ask what goods were actually seen. The answer narrows from a prosperous cargo to 6 bundles of cloth and 2 jars. That is still useful. The listening neighbor leaves with a more modest version. The guest smiles because he knows what you have done. You remind him that a rumor may sleep in your courtyard, but it must pay for its own mat. He says this proverb is new to him. It is new to you as well, invented by irritation, and therefore not presented as a Swahili saying. You roll the invented saying no further. A line born tonight should not be dressed as an ancient proverb by morning. The lamp is moved away from the cloth. Fire and merchandise require a respectful distance. You roll the remaining pieces and tie them. Imported ceramics stand on a shelf farther inside, but the household cooks much of its food in locally made vessels. This mixture is characteristic of Swahili urban life. Overseas objects enter rooms already full of local work and meaning. A glazed bowl does not turn the meal foreign. It becomes the bowl used by this family. Perhaps displayed, perhaps served from, perhaps broken and swept away. You hand the guest his bundle. He places it in the storage corner that once held household baskets. The house has been renegotiating itself around him. A wall remains where it was, yet every useful patch of floor has acquired a seasonal biography. A chipped imported bowl may be repaired, reused, or discarded like any household object. Distance of origin does not prevent ordinary wear. Sleeping arrangements begin after the trade mat is rolled. The guest's room is small, or perhaps a screened place off an outer court, depending on the house. Archaeological discussion of Swahili stone houses includes guest accommodation and semi-public courts, while the exact use of every room remains debated. In this composite scene, you give him the place nearest the courtyard because it lets business visitors enter without crossing deeper family space. During his first week, this seemed temporary. During the second month, a storage jar moved to make room for his chest. During the fourth, nobody remembers where the jar originally stood. You unroll bedding. The guest apologizes for taking space. You accept the apology in the measured tone of someone who would prefer square footage. The guest keeps his valuable pieces close to the sleeping place. You keep household stores farther inside, where business traffic does not pass. Before everyone settles, the guest asks whether the ship truly will leave. You tell him the final load was accepted. He asks about the wind. You tell him the people at the beach are watching. He asks whether you think it will turn tomorrow. You refuse a forecast that might become your fault by breakfast. This is the domestic edge of the monsoon timetable. The visitor counts days because his business and journey depend on them. The household counts days because each one consumes grain, water, lamp fuel, and patience. Both want the same wind for different reasons. Neither controls it. The weather has created a temporary kinship of impatience, though only one of you will gain a sleeping space when the sail rises. The forecast is replaced by a task. You ask him to secure his loose cloth before night air pushes it toward the lamp. Morning brings no departure. You wake to the familiar sounds of a house beginning work, and the guest's chest remains by the outer room. The wind is lighter than the captain hoped. A ready ship can wait at anchor. The household must wait with it. You measure grain again and discover that yesterday's credit bargain has become more urgent. The neighbor promised a delivery before departure, but departure is now uncertain. Do you ask for grain at once and appear distrustful, or wait and risk feeding the guest from a diminishing jar? You send a child with a neutral message. The cloth is admired, and the householder wishes to confirm the agreed measure. Courtesy is useful because it can carry a reminder without spilling it. The child's message returns with a promise before the grain itself. You accept the promise for 1 hour and prepare your own measure. The grain arrives before midday, slightly less than agreed, and in a basket whose measure invites philosophical debate. You pour it into your own container. Volume is clearer when the vessel belongs to you. The neighbor explains that the grain is clean and therefore worth more. You agree it is clean and therefore easier to count as insufficient. The guest listens from the shade, wisely silent. This dispute belongs to local trust, not his foreignness. You add a smaller scoop to complete the payment. The neighbor accepts, and the cloth debt closes. Trade across the courtyard has produced supper for the person who sold the cloth, and perhaps for the guest who brought it. The wind may govern the season, but meals are assembled from smaller settlements like this one. Payment in food binds the overseas cloth sale to the neighborhood's next meal. That connection is practical, visible, and easy to overlook. At prayer time, work pauses for members of the household and neighborhood. Kilwa was a Muslim town long before the 14th century, and mosques stood within its urban fabric. The great mosque grew through building phases from an earlier prayer hall into a much larger structure, its coral and lime fabric marking both devotion and civic investment. Islam here is not an imported ornament attached to trade. It belongs to the town's history and daily ordering of life. You cover the grain, set the scoop aside, and make room for the next obligation. The guest shares the faith, though habits of recitation, legal practice, and courtesy can still differ across regions. Common worship does not remove the need to negotiate where his chest sits. The pause does not empty the house of work. It orders work around an obligation already familiar to the people who live here. The guest spends the afternoon checking ropes on his bundles and comparing his account with another merchant's. You use the quieter interval to reclaim a strip of courtyard wall. A household basket moves back to its old place. The guest notices and asks whether he is being evicted before the ship sails. You say only his goods are being reduced to a reasonable border. He shifts the chest 2 handbreadths. You shift it 1 more. The result is not spacious, but a person can pass without turning sideways. Months of hosting are built from such adjustments. Hospitality is real. So is the fact that bodies and objects occupy measurable room. The monsoon is grand only from far away. Inside the house, it is the reason someone else's sandals have been beside your doorway since the last season. The chest's new boundary leaves a clear route to the inner doorway. You test it by carrying a water bowl through without turning. Toward evening, a sailor arrives with news that the captain intends to depart if the wind holds after dawn. The statement contains 2 conditions and therefore no certainty, but the guest becomes active at once. Cloth is tied, coins are counted, debts are reviewed. Farewells begin and stop when another bundle is discovered. You help separate what goes aboard from what stays for a later coastal exchange. The scene repeats the beach's logic on a smaller scale. Every object wants a decision before the season decides for everyone. The guest offers payment for the final days of food. You accept part in coin and part in cloth, because the household can use both. The arrangement is not evidence of a standard Kilwa lodging fee. It is a careful composite of exchange, hospitality, and domestic commerce, supported by the houses and fines. The sailor cannot guarantee departure, and the household cannot postpone packing until certainty. Everyone begins under conditions of useful doubt. Night settles before the packing ends. The guest's bedding is rolled, then unrolled because he still needs to sleep somewhere. His chest is tied, then opened because the account tablet lies inside. The household has endured 4 months of his possessions spreading. Departure condenses them into 1 evening of frantic retrieval. You find a cup under his mat and a copper coin near the wall. He claims the coin. The cup is yours. Both judgments are accepted. He asks whether you will miss him. You say the courtyard will seem larger. He says this is not an answer. It is the answer he has earned, and he laughs quietly enough not to wake the children. You mend the mat while the guest searches his account. Needle and thread continue steadily beneath his repeated opening and closing of the chest. Before dawn, the wind remains uncertain. The guest stands in the outer court, dressed for departure, while his bundles occupy the path. A messenger from the beach has not yet come. You give him food because waiting hungry does not improve wind. He eats from the same bowl he used during his first week. The house has turned a stranger into a familiar inconvenience, which is one of the more durable forms of relationship. When the messenger finally appears, he says the ship will begin taking people out after first light. The guest closes his chest. Everyone looks at the sleeping space, then politely at him. He notices. Months of ocean trade have reached the moment when a room is nearly empty. The bowl passes from hand to hand. No farewell speech improves the food, so the household lets the meal do its ordinary work. You accompany him as far as the lane beyond the courtyard. He thanks the household, names the people he expects to see on a later voyage, and promises to send a particular cloth. Promises made at departure are easier to carry than baskets, but some return. The guest turns toward the beach with his bundles and a porter. You go back inside. The mat is rolled. The chest-shaped space against the wall appears larger than memory allowed. Then you see the grain jar. Hosting has left it low despite yesterday's payment. A cup is chipped. One sleeping mat needs mending. The visitor is leaving, but the household's ordinary problem remains. Supper must still be made for everyone who belongs here. When the bundles leave the doorway, morning light reaches a patch of floor hidden since the arriving season. You sweep the outer court where the chest stood. A single thread catches in the broom. It may come from imported cloth, local spinning, or the mat itself. The source cannot be known, and it does not need a story. You drop it with the dust. The courtyard has held food, bargaining, rumor, prayer, sleep, irritation, and credit, because trade on this coast lives through households as well as ships. The guests' months were not wasted time between meaningful voyages. They were the season in which relationships made the next voyage possible. You set the damaged cup aside and count the people eating tonight. The number is finally smaller. The grain, however, is smaller too. Your reward for surviving a 4-month guest is the privilege of deciding which pot can feed the family, without announcing that the pantry has also noticed his departure. The damaged cup is not charged against the guest. Its crack is simply included in the household's private account of hosting. At the beach, the departing merchant joins the movement of bundles through shallow water. In the house, you mix grain and water, patch the mat, and return the basket to its place. The wind has taken one problem and left 3 domestic ones behind. That is a fairer ending than a sail on the horizon. The town's prosperity depends on visitors staying, spending, bargaining, and trusting local hosts. A household's patience helps hold the system together, but patience is not an infinite resource supplied by the monsoon. It must be renewed with food, space, and reciprocal obligation. Your fire catches, the pot warms. Beyond the courtyard wall, another adult walks toward the reef with tools, watching the falling tide because a different part of Kilwa's wealth also works to a schedule no foreman controls. Outside, the receding tide begins another work shift. Inside, the pot settles over the fire, and the recovered floor space fills with familiar movement. The coral cutter reaches the reef flat before the water has fully withdrawn. He carries an iron tool, rope, and a wooden lever, and he watches the pale shapes emerge through thinning water. His goal is not to build a whole mosque or house today. It is smaller. Free several usable pieces of living porite coral, get them above the wash, and bring one fine block to the mason while it can still be worked easily. The tide has posted the shift without consulting anyone, which is efficient management if rather poor conversation. When the water is high, the cutting place cannot be reached. When it falls, the reef offers a limited working interval. He steps carefully over wet ground, choosing a route that avoids damaging more than the work requires. Behind him, carriers wait near the shallows. Ahead, the coral is still part of the coast. He has worked this sequence before, yet no two low tides expose the same convenient footing. Familiarity reduces surprise without removing attention. His feet find a drier ridge. He kneels where a suitable mass stands exposed. Swahili builders used more than one kind of coral material. Rough coral rag and rubble could form wall cores, bonded with lime mortar and later plastered. For doorways, arches, vaulting, and other shaped work, builders valued porites from the living reef. Freshly cut, it was softer and easier to carve than after drying. The distinction matters. Kilwa's stone architecture was not hauled from a mainland cliff. Much of its material came from the maritime landscape immediately around the town. The cutter places his tool along a natural line and begins. Each strike must do useful work without shattering the piece. Water remains in the hollows around his knees. The reef is both source and workplace, and the sea will shortly reclaim the floor. The desired block must be sound enough for a finished edge and near enough to move before the channels fill again. Material quality and access are the same decision. The chosen surface is marked lightly. The first groove deepens. He pauses to clear fragments and check the line. A block cut too thin may break during lifting. One cut too broad will take longer than the tide allows. The exact medieval toolkit varies in the surviving evidence, so this scene avoids a catalogue that archaeology cannot securely provide. What is well supported is the technology. Coral obtained from reefs, shaped while fresh, and built with lime made from marine material. He returns the tool to the groove. The sound carries over the flat, joined by work at another patch and by the movement of people gathering food from the shore. The reef supports building, fishing, shell gathering, and routes through shallow water. A town made from coral is not separate from the sea. Its walls begin at low tide. Small fish flick through trapped water beside the work. He keeps his strokes within the chosen line, making the extraction deliberate rather than indiscriminate. Loose fragments are moved aside. The cut piece loosens on one side but holds beneath. The cutter threads rope around it and asks a carrier to brace the opposite edge. Together they use the lever, not with a sudden heave, but with repeated pressure. The coral shifts. Water enters the new seam. Another adjustment frees it, and the piece settles heavily into the shallow pool. Wet coral weighs more than the clean block a mason imagines. It contains water, rough growth, and every inconvenience of having been part of a reef moments ago. The men turn it onto a sling. Their goal is the higher beach before the tide returns. The fine shaping can happen there. If they leave it too long in sun before the mason begins, the surface will harden and make carving slower. The schedule has moved from tide to drying. The carriers lift on a shared breath. The sling takes the weight. Rope tightens around the wet mass, and the coral's rough underside clears the pool. The rope fibers tighten without slipping. Two carriers take the sling between them. Their first steps are short because the block swings. The cutter walks beside it, steadying a corner and directing a path across ridges. Coral beneath bare feet is uneven and can cut. No one rushes blindly. The water is still falling, which gives them time, but the route to shore is longer than it appeared from the beach. Behind them, another piece remains to be freed. The cutter must decide whether to return after this delivery or stay with the first block until it is secure. He chooses the beach. A cracked block would erase the morning's work. The carriers move from reef flat to sand, then up beyond the next high wash. They lower the sling together. The block lands without splitting. Its wet surface can now be read by the mason. They pause once on firmer sand to reset the pole. The stop costs a minute and protects the block, their hands, and the steadiness needed for the final slope. They resume before the muscles cool. The mason has prepared a template for the shaped element needed at the building. It may become part of a doorway or another finished edge where porites can be carved more precisely than rough wall stone. He examines the pores, marks a face, and rejects one corner as too weak. The cutter feels the rejection as a criticism of the reef. though he says nothing. They turn the block. A sounder face appears. The mason begins trimming while the material is still damp and comparatively soft. Thin flakes come away. The future architectural line emerges through subtraction, not through a magical transformation from reef to palace. Every smooth surface requires a person to notice where the coral will bear pressure and where it will crumble. The curve on the template is simple, but simple lines expose poor work quickly. The mason trims toward it in shallow passes, checking both faces after each change. The marked curve becomes more even. The cutter returns toward the reef. The water has begun to pause at its lowest reach. This is the narrow middle of the shift. He chooses a second piece, smaller than the first, and works more quickly, but not carelessly. Farther inland, the town's walls show the result of many such mornings. The great mosque at Kilwa began with an earlier prayer hall and grew through later enlargements. Huzuni Kubwa, built in the early 14th century, used coral and lime on a grand scale, with courts, rooms, and a pool. Those buildings can dominate modern descriptions. The cutter's day remains one groove in one block. Monumental architecture is accumulated labor made durable, not a reason to forget the hands that carried wet stone across sand. Every large building contains these modest postponements. A wall advances by the amount the cost, the labor, and the available material permit on a given day. The next opening remains unfinished. The second block comes free with less resistance. It is rougher and may suit a less exposed position. The cutter marks it for the carriers, then searches for a smaller piece of good porites that can be shaped into a repair or decorative detail. No written order survives for this imagined day's exact pieces. The action is a composite held within known methods. That limit protects the story from false precision. He still has a consequence to manage. The first block took longer than expected, and the water has started returning along the channels. If he remains for a third extraction, the carriers may have to move through deeper water with a swinging load. He tests the current against his ankle and decides that 2 blocks are enough. His choice leaves usable coral in place for another tide. The day's success will be measured by sound blocks ashore, not by exhausting every minute underwater. He turns toward the safer channel. The decision prevents a dramatic rescue and creates a merely sensible morning. The carriers lift the second block and begin toward shore. The cutter gathers fragments that can serve as fill or be moved out of the path, then follows. Water covers the lowest ridges. Their footprints disappear behind them. At the beach, the mason has squared one face of the first block and drawn a shallow curve. The coral is already firmer at the dry edges. He keeps the working face damp enough to control dust and continues carving. The cutter sets down his tools. His shift on the reef is finished because the tide says so, but the material has entered another sequence of labor: shaping, carrying, setting, mortaring and plastering. The returning water darkens the channels first. It gives a visible boundary to work that might otherwise continue until fatigue makes the decision. Tools are counted before leaving. Near the building site, other workers prepare rough wall material. Coral rag does not arrive as neat white bricks. Irregular pieces are selected, fitted, and packed into wall construction with mortar. The wall's eventual smoothness will come from plaster, not from pretending every hidden stone is regular. The cutter and carriers bring the first shaped block on its sling. Its route now runs through town rather than water, past houses of different materials and scales. Not every family lives in a grand stone house. Stone architecture marks wealth, civic investment, and particular urban identities, while earth and timber construction remains part of the settlement. The block reaches the doorway under repair. The mason checks its fit and finds that one lower edge stands proud. At the lane's narrowest point, residents step aside and let the wet block pass. It leaves droplets on packed ground, a brief trail from reef to doorway. The doorway is close enough to see. He removes the block and trims the edge. The correction is small. but setting it badly would transfer strain or leave a gap. Lime mortar can bind and bed the stone. It should not be asked to excuse careless shaping. Nearby, material for lime has followed its own demanding path. Reef coral and shell can be burned to make quicklime, then slaked with water and mixed with sand for mortar or plaster. The burning requires fuel, heat and attention. Archaeological work along the East African coast has found evidence of lime production near shore, and work at Kilwa has identified kiln evidence associated with medieval building. The cutter does not watch a modern explanation. He watches a worker stir prepared mortar and judge its consistency by how it holds on a tool. The mortar worker adds sand gradually, watching texture rather than relying on a fixed recipe detached from local material. Usable consistency is judged in the hand. The mixture clings, then releases cleanly. The shaped block is lifted again. Mortar is spread beneath and along the joining faces. The men lower it slowly, guided by the mason's hands. It settles closer this time. A wooden support holds part of the weight while the joint is adjusted. The cutter presses one shoulder against the sling pole, feeling the load transfer from people to wall. When the mason signals, they release. The block remains. Its wet reef surface has become a built edge within a single day, though it will harden and be finished over longer time. The result is not yet beautiful. Mortar bulges at the joint. Tool marks remain. Beauty at this stage is mostly the absence of a crack. One carrier keeps tension on the sling until the mason confirms the bed is even. Only then does the group let the wall accept the weight. The support remains until the joint holds. Another worker fills the rough wall around the set piece. Small coral fragments enter spaces between larger ones. Mortar binds the irregular mass. The wall's outer face will receive plaster made with lime, giving a smoother, brighter surface than the rubble within. Plaster can protect as well as finish, and repeated maintenance keeps buildings usable. The cutter scrapes loose mortar from the base before it sets. His consequence for choosing only 2 reef blocks is now clear. The doorway can be completed without carriers wading through a rising tide, but a second planned element must wait for another low water shift. The mason accepts this. A building that takes years is accustomed to waiting for mornings. The postponed element is marked in the work plan held through memory and conversation. Tomorrow's low water already has a purpose, though not a guaranteed result. No one treats delay as failure. As the plasterer begins, the rough wall disappears beneath a thin coat. The first pass fills hollows. A later smoothing will refine the surface. Coral has supplied block, rubble, and the raw material for lime, while sand, water, fuel, timber, tools, and human skill complete the system. The signature is maritime, but it is not effortless. Every pale wall stores a history of extraction and transport that a finished surface conceals. The cutter rinses his hands. Fine lime can burn skin, so workers handle it with care, even without modern labels. He moves away from the mixing place, then returns to lift the empty sling. The workday still includes putting tools where they can be found tomorrow. Smooth plaster alters how light meets the building and how rain reaches the joints beneath. Finish and protection belong to the same layer. The first coat remains slightly damp. He walks back toward the beach as the tide covers the cutting ground. Nothing on the reef indicates the exact line of the future doorway now standing in town. The material has left, and the water smooths the working place. Modern documentation can map Kilwa's surviving structures in detail, from the Great Mosque to Husuni Kubwa and other monuments. Those records help protect and study the site. They do not replace the historical action. A cutter had to choose a piece, free it, and accept the tide's limit. A carrier had to bear wet weight. A mason had to shape before hardness increased. The wall exists because these decisions succeeded often enough. The cutter recognizes the route back across the covered reef only by the surface movement. The morning's exposed workplace has become water again. Only the covered reef answers him, but the building, the doorway edge holds. The mason draws a wet tool over the joint. and removes excess mortar. The cutter sees the block's rejected corner now hidden within the wall. What looked imperfect on the beach has found a sound orientation. He feels no grand ownership. His pay, obligation, or share of the work is not recoverable from the architecture, and the story does not invent it. His ordinary goal was to deliver usable coral before the tide erased the shift. He delivered 2 pieces and delayed 1. The consequence is a completed edge and a task waiting for the next low water. This is a sufficient day's result. A completed edge will guide hands, feet, and carried objects through the doorway. Its usefulness begins before anyone praises its form. People will use it without ceremony. The workers shade the fresh work from harsh drying as local practice and conditions require, without claiming a single universal method for every Kilwa wall. Tools are gathered. Prepared mortar is covered or used. The plasterer's hand leaves a surface that catches late light more evenly than the rubble beside it. The cutter tests the placed block with his fingertips, not to move it, only to feel whether it has settled. It has. Behind the town, the sea has returned over the reef flat. Tomorrow's accessible interval will shift with the tide, and the next block must be found in its own time. The damp surface is left without further touching. Too much correction can damage a finish that has reached the point where waiting is the next task. Evening air crosses the fresh plaster. He carries the empty sling past the smooth wall and toward home. The great mosque and Husni Kubua are often used to measure Kilwa's height in the 13th and 14th centuries, but the island's built history extends before and after those celebrated phases. Buildings were enlarged, repaired, abandoned, reused, and lived around. Coral architecture makes change visible because walls endure unevenly. The cutter's final image is not a ruin. It is fresh plaster, still damp, beside a doorway people intend to use. A lamp will later stand inside. Feet will cross the threshold. For now, his hands are empty. The reef is underwater, and the tide has closed the shift without leaving an argument to settle. His empty sling is lighter, but its rope still smells of salt and lime. He coils it carefully, so the next shift begins without a knot inherited from this one. The coil rests beside the tools. By late afternoon, a market keeper spreads a cloth in an outer court and sets several small copper coins near its edge. She does not arrange the whole Indian Ocean in front of her. She has a few local payments to settle, a jar to inspect, and a piece of imported cloth whose price must be remembered. The day's goal is to close these exchanges before the light becomes too poor to judge colour and wear. Around her, Kilwa's wide connections enter in manageable forms. A bead rests in a palm. A ceramic bowl holds water. A strip of cloth is unfolded. Farther away, ivory has come through southern routes, and gold dust from the interior reaches Sofala before moving north through coastal trade. The scale is large when drawn on a map. In her hands, it is a coin small enough to lodge beneath a fingernail. She separates the local coins from a bead and a pierced piece that may have served another use. Similar materials can share a purse without sharing the same function. Her fingers know which object belongs in tonight's payment and which must return to its owner. The final price is spoken once more. She places the buyer's coin apart from those still awaiting a decision. The exchange leaves a small difference to be carried into tomorrow's account. She weighs no imagined mountain of gold. No surviving account can tell us how much passed through Kilwa across its centuries of prominence. Archaeology, coinage, imported objects, architecture, and written reports show that gold moving through Sofala mattered greatly to the town's position. They do not justify a precise total. The keeper knows gold as one valuable current within a broader exchange. Ivory is bulkier and more visible. Cloth, beads, and ceramics arrive from overseas networks. Local food, craft, labor, and regional exchange keep the town alive between ships. Enslaved people were also carried through Indian Ocean commerce, and that fact must be named plainly without turning suffering into atmosphere. She closes her fingers over the copper coins and returns to the payment in front of her. Gold's importance can be stated without converting it into spectacle. The evidence shows a trading position tied to southern supply and ocean demand, while silence about total volume is a limit to respect rather than a gap to decorate. Uncertainty keeps the claim honest. Restraint leaves room for what the sources cannot count. That limit protects the story from the false comfort of a grand total. The coins were struck under Kilwa rulers, bearing inscriptions that tied monetary use to political and religious authority. Many are small copper pieces. Excavations have recovered them in large numbers in the Kilwa region, including domestic contexts, deposits, and hoards. Their dates can be difficult because some issues were copied or continued, so a ruler's name does not always give a simple year for the soil around it. The market keeper does not need a modern chronology to use one. She checks its size, surface, and acceptance among the people present. A coin functions because others will take it. One passes from buyer to seller, then into a small cloth purse. The transaction ends without gold appearing at all. Some coins preserve legible names. Others are worn, clipped, pierced, or difficult to place. Their variety is part of the evidence for circulation across time. The keeper chooses the piece that everyone at the cloth will recognize without discussion. The purse closes around accepted value. Tomorrow it may pass again through another household's hands. A worn edge matters more to tonight's buyer than a perfect dynastic sequence. Coin remains sufficient. A glazed ceramic fragment catches the light near the wall. Imported Persian Gulf wares and Chinese porcelains found at Kilwa testify to long-distance connections, while local pottery remains central to cooking and storage. Objects from abroad did not replace African urban life. They entered it. A bowl might be valued for its finish, used in serving, displayed in a niche, broken on a floor, or buried in the layers that later archaeologists study. The keeper handles an intact vessel with both hands and looks for a crack along the base. She cannot know what future category will be assigned to it. She needs to know whether it will hold water tonight. The vessel passes the test and is set beside the lamp. The vessel's glaze has crossed a long route, but its value here depends on condition and use. She runs a damp finger around the rim, then sets it on a folded cloth so grit beneath it does not widen an unseen weakness. The bowl remains useful in this room. She remembers where it stood before moving it nearer the wall. The waterline inside the vessel confirms that it has held its place. The bowl is set down carefully. Beyond the court, the great mosque gathers people into one of the town's enduring public spaces. Its fabric reflects phases of construction: an earlier northern prayer hall, major enlargement, domes, vaults, columns, and later rebuilding. Sources differ in how they summarize the dates of particular phases, and the building itself is more reliable than a falsely tidy sentence. By the 14th century, it stood within a wealthy Muslim town whose worship, law, learning, and daily obligations belonged to the place. The market keeper finishes her exchange before joining others moving through the lanes. The mosque is not a backdrop to trade. It is part of the civic and religious life that gives the town form beyond buying and selling. People approach the mosque from different lanes and household duties. Their movement joins without erasing those separate lives. Coral architecture gives the gathering a durable place, while repeated maintenance and rebuilding show that durability still requires care. The lanes grow quieter after prayer. Footsteps continue toward doors that open into ordinary domestic rooms. Some people arrive together, while others leave by quieter lanes after their obligation. The gathering has no single entrance. On the headland to the east, Husuni Kubwa extends across a large built complex from the early 14th century. Courts, rooms, formal approaches, and a pool speak to concentrated resources and ambitious rule. Its precise functions and the meanings of all its spaces remain subjects of interpretation. It is safer to see it as evidence of scale, organization, and elite display than to invent a complete day inside every chamber. The keeper sees its mass from familiar angles. She does not pause for a guided view. A payment is still owed near the beach, and the water is already drawing away from the reef. From below, the complex is experienced as walls, openings, and changing levels rather than a single plan. Its scale suggests power and ceremonial purpose, yet daily movement through or around it would still be made one threshold at a time. Even scale is encountered through footsteps. The headland building remains present without absorbing the rest of town. She knows the shortest path around its walls, not an abstract elevation. Familiar scale requires no announcement. The 14th century traveller Ibn Battuta reached Kilwa in 1331 or 1332 and offered an impressed description of a substantial town. His words are useful because they come from a visitor who was there, but they remain one visitor's account, shaped by his route, interests, hosts, and translation. He also reported what a merchant told him about gold dust reaching Sofala from inland. That is written testimony, not a wayhouse record. The keeper walks past timber and coral buildings that no single sentence can summarize. Some residents would recognize the traveler's admiration. Others might notice what he misunderstood, omitted, or saw only briefly. The town does not depend on his approval to be real. The traveler's description must also be read beside physical evidence that corrects one of his broad statements about buildings. His impressed account is a voice in the record, not the town's final narrator. She continues along a lane he may never have entered. Her own town remains larger than his visit. Physical walls preserve details that admiration sometimes flattens. His brief visit remains useful when it is kept at the scale of testimony. Her steps keep their ordinary pace. Kilwa's earlier history reaches back before its grandest coral buildings. Research now places settlement on the island around the 9th century, with the first coral buildings and local coinage appearing near the end of the 10th century. Growth was not perfectly smooth. The town's fortunes rose, altered, and sometimes contracted across centuries. Its strongest 13th and 14th century phases produced the monuments most often remembered. But chronology from excavation shows an episodic urban life, rather than a single uninterrupted ascent. The keeper receives the last payment and folds her cloth. The past beneath her feet is already layered, though she experiences only the present surface. Early settlement layers, locally made pottery, imported finds, coral construction, and coinage do not all begin at once. Their sequence lets archaeologists trace change without forcing every form of prosperity into the same century. No layer carries the whole history. Together the layers show growth, interruption, repair, and renewed use. The sequence is valuable precisely because it preserves uneven change. Later layers cover earlier repairs. Later tradition tells of Shirazi ancestry and dynasties linked to Persia. The Kilwa Chronicle survives in versions written down long after the earliest settlement, and scholars treat its genealogies and narratives critically. Shirazi identity can express prestige, belonging, and descent tradition without proving a datable colony of founders arriving to build an African town. The archaeological picture is clear on the larger point. Swahili towns developed from African coastal communities, while sustained ocean contact brought people, beliefs, goods, and ideas into their history. The keeper ties her purse. She belongs to a town that can be both thoroughly African and thoroughly connected, with no contradiction requiring repair. A claim of respected overseas descent can be socially meaningful even when it is not literal migration history. Keeping those levels separate preserves both the tradition and the African development demonstrated by archaeology. The distinction needs no further defense. The town requires no foreign founding story to explain its achievement. Local achievement and ocean connection remain parts of the same historical life. The basket rests against her hip. The town's prosperity also changes before the Portuguese arrive. Trade routes, regional competitors, supplies of gold, political authority, and wider Indian Ocean conditions shift through the 14th and 15th centuries. Some periods show recession followed by rebuilding and revival. After 1498, Portuguese fleets enter the ocean with violent efforts to redirect and control trade. Kilwa is attacked and occupied in the early 16th century, and Portuguese intervention becomes one factor in a longer transformation. It is not an instant curtain dropped on the island. The keeper's own evening belongs before those events. But the story can carry the later consequence without pretending that a single ship caused every change. Portuguese pressure included attack, tribute demands, occupation, and efforts to divert commerce. Existing regional shifts gave those interventions a changing field to exploit. The later decline is therefore a process with several causes, not a single dramatic date. Change gathers through years of altered choices. No single cause receives the comfort of a complete explanation. The island's later history continues through altered trade, authority, repair, and residence. Consequences arrive through repeated seasons. People continue to live on and around Kilwa Kisiwani after its greatest commercial height. Occupation and rebuilding extend through later centuries. Some structures fall out of use, others are repaired or repurposed, and the settlement's relation to regional trade changes. The phrase "vanished city" would hide this continuity beneath a convenient drama. So would calling the ruins mysterious when their material history is actively studied and locally known. The keeper reaches the beach with her empty basket. The water has withdrawn enough to expose dark reef and pale sand. Houses remain behind her. Boats remain in the bay. Change is present, but absence is not the whole story. Occupation into later centuries means that ruined walls and continued life belong to the same island history. Residents adapted to different scales of trade and authority, rather than stepping out of time when the largest buildings lost their earlier roles. Later residents remain part of Kilwa's story. Continuity is quieter than conquest, but it remains visible in occupation. Households and boat crews continue making practical choices within those larger changes. People remain where summaries often stop. She stops near the place where small craft grounded earlier. A coin payment from the market now rests inside her clothing. The imported bowl remains in the court. The mosque holds the memory of repeated prayer, repair, and enlargement. Husuni Kubwa stands on the headland as evidence of a period when resources could be gathered for a vast complex. Gold and ivory have moved north. Cloth, beads, and ceramics have moved in. Each category can be documented, but none explains Kilwa alone. The town's wealth emerged from its place in overlapping African and ocean networks, from political power, local production, and the seasonal organization of people who knew when ships could come and go. Each connection depends on intermediaries beyond her sight. Inland producers and carriers, coastal boatmen, visiting merchants, household hosts, rulers, craftspeople and sailors. The network is strongest when these ordinary links continue to meet. No single link can claim the whole result. Every transfer depends on a person completing one manageable obligation. The network becomes real only when one obligation reaches the next person's hands. Each handoff preserves or breaks trust. Low light spreads across the shallows. The reef appears where warm water stood earlier, revealing the ground from which builders cut and fishers gathered. A small boat has been pulled higher on the sand. The market keeper turns her basket upside down and shakes out grit. She is not waiting for a lost golden age, nor standing at the edge of an ending she can foresee. She is finishing an evening task. Behind her, a lamp will soon be moved closer to the bowl. In the outer court, someone will count coins again. The long history of Kilwa can be held without making this person carry all of it. Her immediate concern is whether the basket is clean enough for tomorrow. She checks the basket's base where damp fibers can weaken. A simple repair tomorrow will preserve it for another load. The evening closes through maintenance rather than spectacle. One object prepared for the next ordinary use. She presses the loose fiber into place. The handle will be wrapped before the next heavy basket leaves shore. She folds the market cloth into the cleaned basket before lifting it. Tomorrow's repair is already understood. She sets the basket upright. The wind has not yet turned. Offshore, an anchored hull rests against the dimmer water, ready but not moving. The outgoing tide continues to uncover the reef in slow bands. No one on the beach can command the next season, and no one needs to pretend the town's fortunes were ever governed by weather alone. Wind provided the timetable. Kilwa's people built the institutions, relationships, boats, stores, houses, mosques, coins, and working knowledge that made the timetable valuable. The keeper lifts the empty basket and begins home. Her last steps cross firm, wet sand. While the light lowers, the water goes out, and the expected wind remains just beyond certainty. She does not turn back toward the ship. Readiness has already been achieved by other hands. Her own completed account is the clean basket, the received coin, and the path home before full darkness. The wind has still not declared itself. She keeps her pace even as the first lamps appear behind the wall. Behind her, the town continues through lamps, meals, accounts, and doors closing for the night. Offshore, the ready hull waits across shallow water, asking nothing further of the beach. Behind the wall, the lamp is already prepared for her return home. The shore darkens behind her. The basket rests beside the courtyard wall. A little sand remains in its weave, pale against the darker fibers. Nearby, the lamp holds a steady low light. Water moves beyond the houses, too far away to see from the court, but close enough to remain part of every familiar object. Nothing needs carrying now. The handles lie flat. The last load has already crossed. The cloth beneath it has dried. In the courtyard, the mat has been rolled and the bowls have been put aside. The space where the guest's chest stood is open again. Lamplight reaches the smooth plaster, then fades before the doorway. The house has returned to its ordinary shape, though the memory of another person's bundles still fits against the wall. The room is neither waiting nor empty. It is simply settled for the evening. No one needs the missing space explained. The coral edge beside the doorway holds its place. Tool marks are hidden beneath the smoother surface, and the sling is no longer under the block. Beyond the town, water covers the reef that showed at low tide. The wall and the sea keep their separate quiet positions. A hand that carried wet stone has finished. A hand that spread plaster has been washed clean. The doorway remains ready for morning. At the beach, low light lies across wet sand. The small boat is drawn above the wash. A basket, a rope, and the dark line of an anchored hull remain familiar without asking for another journey. Water moves out and returns in shallow folds. The wind is present only as a slight pressure on cloth and skin. No count is being revised. The rope has been coiled beside it. The lamp grows lower in the courtyard. Coral, basket, water, and folded cloth keep the shapes they were given earlier. The beach beyond the walls darkens without disappearing. There is no final cargo to lift, and no guest to feed before departure. The room holds its quiet arrangement. The low light rests on the plaster. The water continues beyond it, and the evening is allowed to remain unfinished by speech. Nothing new enters the low light. The lamp asks for no further tending tonight.